Welcome to episode 1 of Let's Rage Together. Today's topic of discussion is imposter syndrome.
We annihilated the world before your very ears.
You can't handle the truth.
Very ears.
Welcome to the very first episode of Let's Rage Together, a podcast about the politics of total liberation. I'm Pete.
And I'm Taryn. And since this is the first episode of the podcast, we thought we'd tell you a little bit about why we started it and what we're going to be covering in future episodes. Pete and myself are just really good friends who often have discussions and debates about a whole range of topics, and we thought that a podcast would just be a really good way for us to sort of solidify our thoughts on these issues and force us to read some more and hopefully challenge our thinking, and hopefully also challenge some other people to engage in critical thinking and critical discussions as well.
So by similar topics, we mean things like feminism, veganism, animal liberation, anything that falls under total liberation, but also anything else we feel like speaking about, even psychological and philosophical topics like today's topic, imposter syndrome. It might not be totally relevant to total liberation, but we feel it often. And from what we read leading up to this podcast, it seems like most people do. So we thought it was a cool and relevant thing to speak about.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to note, though, that although we're discussing imposter syndrome, that syndrome is not at all relevant to us doing this podcast because we are actual imposters. We have absolutely no idea what we're doing.
We are not experts or authorities on this topic or any other topic that we might speak about from here into infinity.
Yeah, none at all. Like, just don't expect anything.
Yeah, lower those expectations. Shout out to Paul from the Bearded Vegans. We listen to the Bearded Vegans podcast quite a lot. We reached out to him to ask him a lot of practicalities of how to set up a podcast, and he helped us quite a lot. So
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
He saved us at least 5 Google searches, I'm sure. What would we have even done without Paul, Pete?
Who knows, Taryn? I don't know.
So before we get into our main discussion, we're going to start off with a little segment that we're calling the bad and the rad. So we'll each be sharing 3 things that we think are rad and 3 things that we think are shitty. So Pete, what is your first item on the bad list today?
So the first item on my bad list is Afrin, which is a city in northern Syria that has just been taken over by a fascist Turkish government. And it really bugs me that people are not speaking about Rojava and what's happening in northern Syria more. So that's one thing that's on my bad list, and it's bugging me a lot.
Totally. That is definitely a bad, which maybe we'll discuss in another episode. Who knows?
Yeah.
So my first bad item is just general patriarchal bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm so sick of that shit every day in all places from people who really should know better. What's your number 2?
Okay, my number 2 is toxic masculinity.
Yes.
Ties in with patriarchy, and it really fucking bugs me a lot that masculinity seems so sensitive and fragile in so many males. And it really annoys me, and it bugs me especially with conversations that are happening around things like the hashtags #MeToo, hashtags Men Are Trash, whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of toxic masculinity within a lot of the, scenes of things that I'm into anyway. Just people being very fragile and toxic. Like holding up signs that say real men do this or real men don't do this. And please stop that.
Yeah, just stop it. Okay, my second bad thing is pretty lame and pretty self-centered, but I'm super bummed that it's nearly winter.
Oh, no way. Winter.
I'm not amped.
I love winter.
No, you have to wear so many layers and it's so cold in Joburg and I'm just not ready.
Okay. I feel like winter's great.
Well, it's my list, so you know what? Leave my list alone.
Okay. The third item on my bad list is something that else is bugging me at the moment are vegans who ignore other oppressions.
Yes, I can totally agree with that.
Like, I hear sometimes vegans being racist or sexist or spewing other stupid shit, but thinking that it's enough to be vegan and not thinking about the intersections of other oppressions. So that's the third thing on my bad list at the moment. And you?
Your list makes my list sound super shallow, but my third kind of shitty thing at the moment is just that I hate that I'm really useless at time management. Like, there are so many things I want to do, and I'm just really bad at managing my time and being an adult in general.
When you figure out how to manage your time, can you teach me? Because I also
will
suck at
indeed.
managing my time. That's a good
I
thing.
don't foresee that happening, but if a miracle occurs and I somehow figure it out, I'll let you know.
Thanks, because I'm also bad at adulting. So
Yeah, adulting sucks.
okay, so the first item on my rad list.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new vegan restaurant that's opened up in Randburg in Johannesburg called the Fussy Vegan. And it is amazing. And Werner, the guy who runs it, is really cool. And you should definitely go there and try the seitan cheesesteak or the mac and cheese or any of their dairy sandwiches.
I haven't
don't
tasted
know.
either of those. I'm actually quite bummed about that.
Well,
But the stuff that I have tasted is really good.
you should put the fact that you haven't been at the Fussy Vegan on
Actually,
your
yes.
bad list.
I just swapped mine. Feel like I haven't tasted half of the stuff at Fussy Vegan.
What's the first item on your rad list?
My first one is that I recently got to do my first sort of mini activism talk at Ashes Farm Sanctuary in Pretoria. So that was pretty cool because it's something I've wanted to do for a long time. And the bonus was that I got to hang out with some donkeys and cows and pigs and goats and sheep
Awesome.
at the same time, which just was rad.
I heard that this talk was filmed.
It was filmed.
Where can we see this talk of yours?
You can see it on the Animal Liberation Collective Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. Did the talk with two of my homies from Animal Liberation Collective. So, yeah.
The second item on my rad list at the moment is a podcast called Revolutionary Left Radio, which is great. And I really enjoy it. The guy talks about a range of everything that you can consider left-leaning politics. And he recently did one with one of the people who do Vegan Vanguard podcast, and it's a really good interview. So you should go check that podcast out.
Yeah, I listened to that episode yesterday, actually. It was very cool. I just want to say as well that we're not being sponsored by any of the people we're panting right now, although we won't object to free stuff from Fussy Vegan.
Yeah.
Just saying. My next thing, it's my second thing, right, is just cows.
Cows are amazing.
I love cows. Cows are rad.
Cows are great.
They're beautiful and gentle and cool, and we got to hang out with some recently, which was cool.
Yeah.
And they're just super rad. They're much more amazing than most people I know.
Definitely.
So that's my second rad thing.
Definitely one of the raddest animals around.
Totally. So what is your final rad item, Pete?
At the moment, I'm reading a book by Carol J. Adams. Carol is one of my favorite thinkers within the vegan realm, vegan world. And the book is honestly blowing my mind. It's called The Sexual Politics of Meat, a Feminist-Vegetarian Theory. And it is really something that I would highly suggest everyone reads, not only vegans.
You know what would be really rad and would add to my next list for the next episode? Is if you could finish reading that and then give it to me.
Okay. I'll try.
That is rad though. Then my last thing, and I'm quite offended that this was not on your list, is that we have finally started a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I'm super stoked. We've been speaking about it for a while. And yeah, here we are recording the first episode. And I'm very hurt that you didn't include this in your list.
I'm so sorry.
It's too late.
It would have been so cool if I was like, oh, that's also on my list.
It's too late. That's why I made you go first, because I was testing our friendship. And you
Oh my
failed.
God.
So that's the bad and the rad. So I guess we'll move on to the main discussion.
Yeah, let's go.
So as we said, we're talking about imposter syndrome today. So for all two listeners that possibly don't know what imposter syndrome is, It's basically a syndrome or phenomenon where a person experiences themselves as a fraud. They would have achieved some level of success or acknowledgement from someone else, and they will perceive it as due to luck or timing or some other external force not related to their capabilities.
Cool.
Yeah. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome is a big deal for me that I didn't realize I had for like my whole life until I found out about it. Also have to do a little disclaimer here that I totally thought it was spelled T-E-R, not T-O-R, but it's impostor syndrome.
Yeah, we had entire conversations about something that Pete was spelling incorrectly, or spelling like an American, which I guess is also okay.
So I was spelling this word incorrectly in my head while I was talking about it, but it's the same thing, right?
Unacceptable.
Okay. So I experience imposter syndrome a lot every single day, where I feel like I have it pretty bad, where most of the time I feel like I'm going to get found out as a fraud. And recently, this happened to me when I was offered a position at a studio here in Johannesburg, and they called me, and I didn't really know how to respond. Of course, I took it up because I needed work, and it was something that I felt like I should do. But at first, I thought, why are they calling me? I'm going to start this thing and they're going to find out I'm a fraud, that my skills are not the right skills they need, and it's just going to bum out. But 2 months in now, and it's been okay so far, but still I feel like every day I could go into work and they're going to find me out as a fraud.
Yeah, because they would keep you on for 2 months and just like pretend that you're competent and pay you for nothing.
Well, this is imposter syndrome. It's irrational.
What did they say to you when you questioned them, Pete, about hiring you?
Yeah.
Tell all 2 listeners what happened.
So I didn't believe them that they wanted to hire me, and I asked them, is it because I make coffee well? And my friend Ryan, who called me, said, Pete, you've literally never made me coffee.
It just shows how illogical this way of thinking is.
Yeah.
That you will literally think it's attributed to something that you've never even done.
Yeah.
But I think it is pretty common. If I remember correctly, it's said to be within the region of about 70% of people who experience imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
But I think it might actually be more. I'm sure most people feel this at some point in some area of their life.
Yeah, who are these 30% of people that don't feel it?
Yeah, that's bullshit. I mean, do you think there are actually people who don't experience it at all? Like they don't ever feel incompetent when they are?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think that there are some people who don't. I've met people who seem genuinely very self-aware, self-confident. Not arrogance, but they know what they're doing and they have a confidence in this. And I wonder if people who live outside of our society would feel it or need it.
I think there's definitely a lot of social elements to it.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think the majority of people, either way, just the way humanity is constructed, like culturally, socially, in most places, I don't know. I think it's set up for us to feel incompetent.
Yeah,
everything is so competitive.
I wonder if people who lived, say, in like nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes or in civilizational society outside of our Western kind of culture, if it would be as prevalent because of the systems that we have set up that I feel like exacerbate imposter syndrome.
I think it might still occur, like, I don't know, if there are certain tasks that earn you some kind of social credit, I guess. Yeah. You could feel incompetent if you see someone like one of your peers doing something better than you, or you think they're doing it better than you, you might feel like you're maybe incompetent. But I think our societies are definitely set up more for us to experience this. I think even the people who do seem confident and seem like they're not affected by it, surely they experience it in other areas of their life. Like you can be an expert in something and be really competent and confident, but then in other areas of your life maybe feel inadequate, even if you're fine by most people's standards.
Yeah, true. And maybe it has to do with confidence and I mean, there could be any number of factors, internal, external, that make some people feel imposter syndrome more, and maybe for some people it's more subtle. And when opportunities come along, or they get some achievement or success or something, maybe they do feel, I mean, the majority of people do, but maybe the small group don't feel it to the extent that the rest of us do. That it's just like a passing, quick, I hope I know what I'm doing. And
oh, well, let me just do it and see. Yeah, I can agree with that. But I do think that even the people who, like you said, you have encountered people who just seem really confident and all of that, but maybe they're still experiencing imposter syndrome. Like, they seem to know what they're doing, but internally they're freaking out, thinking like, what am I even doing in life?
Yeah, I mean, when we were writing, or thinking about how to put together this podcast, I asked a friend of mine, without telling him what I was doing, do you ever experience imposter syndrome? Do you know what it is? Because he's a person who just seems very confident in himself, like very intelligent, like he knows what's happening all the time. And he said, Peter, I feel that literally all the time. I feel like I'm such an imposter.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised to hear that.
Yeah, because that's someone you look at as being confident and competent, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe it's more than 70%. I think maybe the majority of people, at least in sort of Western civilization, feel it pretty often.
Yeah, I mean, even in other civilizations, I guess. But maybe experts or people who are actually really highly skilled or know a lot of stuff are more likely to feel imposter syndrome. Say, for example, like friends who I have involved in academia realize that the more they read and the more they find out about things, the less they know about that.
Yeah.
And so they feel imposter syndrome more. Like, what am I doing writing this paper when there's such a massive pool to get to learn from, and so many people contributing to this already?
Yeah, I guess the more you realize how much stuff there is to know, the more small and incompetent you feel. So it makes sense that experts would feel.
Yeah, and then people who don't delve deep enough into certain topics, who maybe know very little to nothing, feel imposter syndrome less.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like it's, would you say, like inversely proportional, that the more you know, the more imposter syndrome you have?
I think for a lot of people it could be, because then you get people who have literally not even like visited the Wikipedia page on a topic, and they have this very confident opinion about that topic, and they don't know what they're talking about, but they feel it's like that saying, you don't know what you don't know. Like, if you only know a tiny amount, you can't possibly understand how much there is to know. So you just think, oh, I must know like 80% on this topic.
Exactly.
But you don't. You know 80% of 1%, if that makes sense. So speaking about those people who don't know anything about a topic but feel confident, do you think that sometimes people like that should have imposter syndrome?
Definitely. If I look at someone like Trump, I think you should have imposter syndrome.
Although it's not really imposter syndrome, you should just be aware of your incompetence, I guess.
Exactly, but I do feel like some people could do with having some imposter syndrome, just to make them check themselves.
Yeah, although imposter syndrome is being successful and denying that success.
Oh, okay.
Like being competent and thinking you're not. So I guess they should have the feelings of imposter syndrome, but it's actually more just like you should just be self-aware about how ridiculously incompetent you are. Yeah.
So, I think maybe I'm misunderstanding it or pushing it too far, the definition of it. But I definitely feel like there are more people who should have imposter syndrome and don't experience it than those who do.
Yeah. Well, there is a definition to define people like Trump, but I think you're right in saying that there are people who should be feeling that, but it's not so much that they should be feeling imposter syndrome. They should just be feeling like an imposter, because they are.
Yeah, I get that.
So there is actually a term to explain the converse of imposter syndrome, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And again, for the one listener that doesn't understand, that has not heard the definition before, it's basically this illusory superiority felt by people who are incompetent. So you think you're really good at something, but actually you're terrible. So basically Trump.
Okay.
They should just call it the Trump effect.
I think they have actually called him the Dunning-Kruger president.
Okay,
So I think he actually epitomizes what this is.
totally. But they should just change the name to the Trump effect because it's much quicker to say.
What a fucking idiot. I think that there are so many people who have Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, like they're totally incompetent but super, super confident.
So John Cleese sums up the Dunning-Kruger effect pretty well.
He does indeed.
I think the problem with people like this is that they are so stupid that they have no idea how stupid they are. You see, if you're very, very stupid, how can you possibly realize that you're very, very stupid? You'd have to be relatively intelligent to realize how stupid you are. There's a wonderful bit of research by a guy called David Dunning at Cornell, who's a friend of mine, I'm proud to say, who's pointed out that in order to know how good you are at something requires exactly the same skills as it does to be good at that thing in the first place, which means, and this is terribly funny, that if you're absolutely no good at something at all, then you lack exactly the skills that you need to know that you're absolutely no good at it. And this explains not just Hollywood, but almost the entirety of Fox News.
So yeah, I think that summed up Dunning-Kruger really well, or Trump effect, as I'm going to call it from now on.
Trump effect, also.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a perfect explanation for people like that.
So, I mean, when you think about someone like Trump, or another complete idiot who's in charge of anything, there are probably so many people who could fill that position, who would know what they were doing. Not that I'm saying that there should be another president or that anyone should have that much power over people.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think politics are more complex and nuanced than people think. But it bothers me that there's so many people who are really intelligent and could do a much better job, but possibly because of the imposter syndrome, they aren't doing it. And then Dunning-Kruger people are doing it.
Yeah.
And just kind of wrecking everything.
Yeah, I think that's the frustrating thing about imposter syndrome and also about Dunning-Kruger is that you've got so many problems in the world, but how do you even begin to solve it when you have these super intelligent, super competent people doubting themselves and just thinking, well, maybe I'm not good enough to do this thing. And then you got these complete fucking morons who are just like, okay, cool, I'll do that. I'm kick-ass.
Yeah.
I can do this.
Which is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Like every day you hear about these people.
So how do you actually solve that? How do you take away the idiots and put actual intelligent people in positions where they can actually make a difference without them having a panic attack and being like, I can't do this?
So I don't know. I don't have a solution. I feel like arrogant to say insert system here.
Third world problem solution. Yeah, basically it sucks that the world is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was reading about all of this, though, imposter syndrome, Dunning-Kruger, I also found quite an interesting, it's kind of a form of Dunning-Kruger where competent people overestimate the competence of other people. So it's basically like putting Dunning-Kruger on someone else. Because they assume it's easy, if something's easy for them, that it should be easy for other people. And they call this the curse of knowledge. So basically, the more knowledge or skills or experience you have, the harder it is for you to understand that the thing you're discussing or doing is hard for other people.
Okay.
Like I've seen this with musicians, for example, trying to teach beginner musicians something and saying, okay, well, just hold the fifth fret here or whatever, and the person doesn't even know what a fret is. Or I think it happens a lot with teachers as well, like in education, where people will think, oh, this teacher's so bad, I don't understand what they're saying, but maybe the person is just an expert and is forgetting how hard it is to learn the basics and taking it for granted and then speaking above the level of their students.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that maybe is different from the Dunning-Kruger effect in the sense that the Dunning-Kruger effect is I think you could say it's a blanket negative thing,
Yeah.
and maybe a form of arrogance
Mm.
or ignorant arrogance in a way.
Yeah.
But this curse of knowledge does not coming from a place like that. It's like
Yeah.
someone who's just really into what they're into,
Yeah.
and so they just forget the basics and where they started from.
Yeah. And I think they're kind of coming from a place of modesty where they're not realizing how good they actually are. And then, overestimating somebody else's competence, I guess.
Mm.
Just assuming like this is easy, you should know how easy it is.
So I came across another term. I know we're overloading everyone with terms.
But they're all related.
They're all related.
Yeah.
But this one has got a really hectic name.
Mm-hmm.
So bear with me. It's called Ultracrepidarianism.
Okay, what does it mean?
So Ultracrepidarianism is the bad habit that people have of giving their opinions or advice on things that they know absolutely nothing about.
So basically like the whole of Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. So I would agree with that, definitely. If you see the amount of comments on stuff from people on any post that evoked any kind of emotion.
Mm.
I mean, I actually did this as an experiment once for a while. I kind of sparked 300 plus arguments constantly on my Facebook, where for about a month, I would put up a word without giving my opinion on it or anything. It would just be something that would spark debate.
Like what? Like what kind of
So
word?
like stuff that's not black and white bad. Like it's like, for example, I'd put up evolution
Yeah.
or Israel
Yeah.
or something where there's debate around that
Yeah.
word.
So like a controversial issue,
Yeah.
but you're not giving your opinion on it.
But it's just a word.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There was nothing loaded with it.
Mm.
But the reactions that people had, oh my goodness. Like you should have seen the responses.
It's actually a super interesting social experiment.
And I tried to, I was going to make a zine about it.
Yeah.
Just save all of the comments and stuff. But really it got really intense and people were unfriending people, getting super upset with each other over like a word that had nothing loaded, but because you see it, it evokes this response.
Yeah.
Like especially in people who didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like surely a lot of those very fueled angry comments are usually from people who don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. So I feel like I had quite a diverse range of friends on Facebook. And I would say, for example, on evolution, put up just the word evolution. And a religious friend of mine would comment lies. And then from there, it's just downward waterfall of chaos, you know? So I feel like definitely Facebook is all about that ultracrepidarianism. So, but where it came from, just in case anyone's interested, is that there was a Greek artist, apparently who coined the term, when a shoemaker dared to criticize his painting.
Which is crazy. Like, what does a shoemaker know?
Exactly. So he was sitting in his studio painting, and then the shoemaker came around and criticized him, and he said, like, fuck off, are you ultracrepidarian?
That sounds like such a badass insult. I'm going to start using that.
So do you think they should call it Facebook crepidarianism?
No.
I apologize immediately.
That's a very bad idea.
So it's kind of directly related to Dunning-Kruger, I think.
Yeah.
But I feel like I don't know what causes it. Maybe the anonymous factor or like keyboard cowboy factor of social media, or where you can be physically removed from a situation. But I feel like this happens less. For example, if you were doing outreach, like say like vegan outreach or something to people, or you were watching a talk somewhere where you would be physically present, you would be much less likely to be an ultracrepidarian, except that for the shoemaker, of course.
Yeah, he was just bold in his ultracrepidarianism.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you're right that it's probably more common on social media where you kind of anonymous, so you can get angry about stuff and unfriend people and get like very irrational.
I love
Right.
unfriendly people.
But you hate everyone.
Yeah.
So it's fine. But I feel like on social media especially, it's very easy to create these kind of echo chamber environments where you surround yourself with like-minded people. So you have a bunch of idiots surrounding themselves with other idiots, and then they post idiotic things, and their friends just like encourage that idiocy with more idiocy.
Yeah.
And I think that does happen more online, but it also depends on the situation, because in real life, I mean, if you think of South Africa, like every second household will gather around a braai as like a social event. So already they all like totally okay with exploiting animals, but then you'll have like these super conservative people making casual racist remarks,
Yeah.
and nobody says anything
True.
because like they're in this little private echo chamber of racism, and everyone's like, this is totally fine, like, you know. So I think the same thing can happen. Then they'll start talking about something political and all have very strong incorrect views. You know,
Yeah.
and all be like, yes, that's true what you're saying,
Yeah,
because
and
it reinforces what they want to believe.
And I guess not necessarily always incorrect, but definitely uninformed.
Yes.
They just don't know what they're speaking about. And you all know this happens at your family gatherings.
Yeah,
Everyone
totally.
listening.
Everyone has had that experience where you're like, should I say something, and be like ousted.
I feel like it's especially common with white people.
Totally. White people are the worst.
And they'll say like this incendiary little side remark
Yes.
about them or they or something.
Yeah,
And assume that because everyone else there is white,
that they're fine with it.
fine.
Yeah, and then if you call them on that bullshit, then they're like, oh, geez, don't be so sensitive. We're all like, you know, obviously we don't really think these things. And you're like, yes, you do,
Yeah.
because you're saying them, you piece of shit.
Yeah, you wouldn't have said that if there was a person of color present.
Yeah, exactly.
So-
Like, don't pretend you don't have piece of shit views.
Yeah.
Like when you are being a piece of shit.
On that note, please keep calling out your family.
Yes, please
And
tell
your
people
neighbors.
when they're being pieces of shit.
Don't be silent on these issues.
Yeah. We have gone on a massive tangent right now.
Okay, so I guess we've spoken quite a lot about the negatives of imposter syndrome. And I think imposter syndrome could really paralyze you. So if you have imposter syndrome and it's bad, it could probably get to a point where every opportunity that comes along that you are offered, even if it's positive, you will start to turn it down.
Yeah.
And you could potentially paralyze yourself, and you will miss opportunities and maybe live your life less than you could.
Yeah.
So I get that, and I think it's pretty obvious when you think about imposter syndrome. But do you think that imposter syndrome could have any positive functions?
I think to an extent it could, to the point where it kind of motivates you to do better, or if you're trying something new, or you're in a new position or a new situation of leadership or anything like that, and you feel a little bit incompetent, it could push you to make sure that you're not incompetent and do better and try harder, but only to that point. I think anything beyond that is just going to be self-defeating, and it's going to affect your confidence. And
Yeah, I don't know if it's overwhelmingly negative. I think, I guess like a balance in everything is good. And maybe even with imposter syndrome, maybe even Dunning-Kruger.
yeah,
Like that whole fake it till you make it cliche.
exactly. I think sometimes you have to fake competence to just push yourself to
Yeah.
get somewhere, I guess.
Sometimes have to throw yourself into something and maybe learn while it's happening. And maybe imposter syndrome could even be good to the extent that it protects you a little.
In what way?
Like in a way of self-preservation.
Mm.
You have to obviously be careful that you're not like
Slipping into Dunning-Kruger, I guess.
slipping into Dunning-Kruger, but also the other way where you like paralyzing yourself, like I
Yeah.
mentioned. So I think it's kind of a good thing. Like you could say a little bit of stress is a good thing sometimes, just in a way that if you don't ever experience imposter syndrome, then maybe you'll throw yourself headfirst into things, and maybe that's a good way to live life. I don't know. But maybe sometimes you need to question, do I really know what I'm doing here?
Yeah, I think it's also kind of a normal and necessary part of learning. So if you get a new job, for example, or you're doing a new activity that you haven't done before, I think everybody will feel a little bit incompetent in trying to find their feet. I'm not sure if that would be classed as imposter syndrome, because you are incompetent. It's not an inaccurate assessment.
Yeah.
You literally don't know what you're doing. But in a sense, you're fine where you are because you're learning, and you have to go through that to become competent. So I think that kind of learning process, imposter syndrome, is good.
Yeah, so
because it makes you feel uncomfortable because you're learning new things, and then that's the only way you can become competent.
So imposter syndrome is not necessarily a fixed thing. Maybe it could sometimes be a transitionary phase.
Yeah.
Where you just feel it for a while, like what is going on.
Yeah, and then you become competent to the level where you want to be.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you recognize that and don't just carry on feeling like an imposter.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier how an example of where I felt it with my job offer, but where do you feel it, and how, if you feel it, how do you cope with it?
Yeah, I also feel like I have imposter syndrome pretty often, probably daily. But my main kind of area at the moment where I'm feeling it is probably in my studies. When I got accepted to do a master's degree, I honestly didn't even believe that it was legit. Like, I was waiting for an email to say we mixed up your application with someone else's, or, you know, just to find out that they had one spot left, and I was just this random applicant that were just like, we'll take her tuition fees and it'll be rad and hopefully she'll pass.
That's ridiculous.
It's not though.
That's ridiculous, because you got accepted. You already, correct me if I'm wrong, have another honors degree, which you started and completed successfully, and you can have that to your name.
Yeah, but I feel like I don't even remember anything from that degree, so it's like I'm a double imposter. Yeah, so that's kind of the main one, where I still don't quite feel, I don't think I'm going to feel like I deserve to be there until I actually finish it. So we'll see how that works out. But I don't think I really have any good coping skills. I generally just avoid responsibility, and yeah, I don't know how I cope with it. I just always feel like an imposter. Probably the only thing that does help a bit is if someone's relying on me. Like, if other people are relying on me to do something, then I'll just do it even if I feel like I can't. But for the most part, I'll just kind of stop. If I feel like I'm getting somewhere or it's too real, then I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to back out of this to avoid failure and exposure as an imposter.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is so terrible sometimes.
It's so much fun. I love it. But in terms of coping, I came across another sort of cognitive bias called the Jonah Complex, which is basically a fear of success or self-actualization, where you just don't want to commit to anything, where you avoid anything that could lead to success. And I feel like this is basically my daily state of being. Like, if I feel like I could become successful at something, I will generally just back out of it and miss opportunities, like you say.
Why though? What is it about success that makes you not want to achieve it?
I think it's a combination of things. Like, on the one hand, it's almost like, okay, if I am successful at this thing, then I'm really at risk of being exposed as an imposter, because I really don't deserve to be there. Or it's like more social pressure. You become successful and then there's more responsibility and more like people expecting things of you, and it's just...
Yeah, I get that. I think I have that to an extent as well. I feel like being an adult in general can kind of force you to get over your imposter syndrome sometimes. That if you let your imposter syndrome cripple you, then you're just not really going to be able to function or pay your bills or whatever costs you have. I mean, I guess it's not only a financial thing too. We keep speaking about it in terms of financial success or achievement, but it could be anything in life that you do.
Yeah.
Any position you're in, even a relationship.
Yeah, you basically just have to function in the world, and that's sometimes the best way, I guess, to just get over your anxiety, get over your fears, just do it. Like, you don't know what you're doing, but whatever, you have to.
Yeah, I mean, it means a lot of people feel like they don't know what they're doing, but the world is continuing.
Yeah. But hopefully at some point in life we'll realize we're actually okay. It's like one or two things at least.
And not just be dying thinking, wow, I got really lucky. My
That'll
whole
probably
life.
be me. I'll probably be on my deathbed and like, guys, thanks for being rad to me, but I just want to let you know that I did not have a clue what I was doing in anything. But thanks for letting me survive this long.
I think imposter syndrome can also be harmful and impact your self-esteem and your confidence sometimes.
Mm.
If you feel like a fake or a fraud, you are going to be much less likely to internalize any compliments you get from people or any praise of what you've done.
Yeah, I think you're basically constantly beating yourself up and saying, yeah, I've achieved this thing, but I'm not worthy of it, which is
Yeah.
really bad negative self-talk.
I wish I could think of things outside of work function, but I guess work takes up a lot of our time every day. And
For
so-
your time, not my time. I'm
Well,
unemployed.
you're a student, fun employed.
Unemployed, yeah, for sure.
Like I was working on a project recently, or a freelance project recently, where I had to work on this website and I ended up breaking it, and I don't know what I did. So I didn't have imposter syndrome,
Mm.
but I felt like I should have, and maybe they would have protected me from doing it because I was an imposter. But it was a thing that I've done numerous times,
Yeah.
and it was just a factor that I had left out or forgotten about. But I feel like that is what imposter syndrome does to you, is that you will do something and succeed 200 times,
Mm.
and then the one time you don't, it totally makes your imposter syndrome worse.
Yeah.
That you think, wow, I really don't know what I'm doing because on this one time I fucked up.
Yeah. But that doesn't make you an imposter. It's like the same kind of negative or faulty thinking as you'd get in depression or anxiety, where like you'll get 200 compliments or do 200 things right. And the one time you don't, that's what you focus on. You forget everything else and you just like, I suck at everything because I messed up this one thing. I'm an imposter. And I think that's just like, it's actually just a bad human habit, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the person, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think I can also relate to, like, when you say, you know, if you get compliments, you don't know how to internalize them. And I don't know. I think if you have imposter syndrome, and I've felt this often, like when you get compliments, you almost feel bad because you're like, I've deceived this person into thinking I'm good at something and I'm actually just a garbage human.
So harsh on yourself.
But that's what it does. That's what it makes you think.
Yeah, true. Do you think it makes you feel better to know that most people are experiencing imposter syndrome?
It should, and I guess sometimes it does, but not really. I still feel like an imposter.
Yeah, that's true.
Even if I realize that most people, like I do believe that most people don't know what they're doing, and they're just like really good at faking it or kind of making things happen either way. But I always will feel like, okay, but I'm more of an imposter.
Yeah.
Like you might feel like that, but I really am.
Yeah, that's like an inherent thing, I think, in imposter syndrome. I think it also could do with other factors, other external factors. I'm talking about in terms of where imposter syndrome comes from. That's, say, for example, something like the rate of information available to people that I read is doubling every 10 years. So like a 16-year-old now could potentially know more than someone who's much older than them, just because of the rate of information that's been available to them their whole life. And I feel like this could make your imposter syndrome worse knowing this, just because how could you possibly keep up with this rate of information? You're going to feel like an imposter all the time as the rate of information grows and the older you get, because you can't keep up. And so you will maybe think, what am I doing here? There's people that are much more qualified than me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty well-known fact that the next generation will always be smarter than the previous one, probably partially at least for that reason. But you could look at it from both sides, because there's always going to be people who know more than you, but there's always going to be people who know less and experience these feelings more than you.
That's true.
And at the same time, even the 16-year-old kid who knows a bunch of stuff that we didn't know till last week, like we still have a lot of life experience and other kinds of knowledge that you just need physical time for some stuff. So
yeah, true.
I mean, I think you just got to focus on the things you are good at and the knowledge you do have, and try not to cry yourself to sleep every night. I don't know.
I think that capitalism could also play a massive role. I mean, we live in this society dominated by capitalism, which is, in my opinion anyway, an oppressive pyramid scheme system. And our society's idea of success in terms of whatever, relationships, finances, gender roles, how to be a real man, like toxic masculinity again, can also contribute to imposter syndrome and the media advertising. I don't know what you think, if this doesn't help.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially in the sort of individualistic Western society, there's a lot of pressure on that. Like, what do you earn? Like, are you a real man? Are you like how a woman should be? Like, are you even the right gender or the right sexual orientation to be worthy of some kind of social standing, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that all makes people feel incompetent when they shouldn't. Like, just because you're not fitting into whatever mold society says, you somehow feel lesser from the get-go, which is such a load of crap.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of other things like, for example, your income, do you think that could also correlate with where you fit on the range between imposter syndrome and Dunning-Kruger? So, for example, I can imagine someone starting off being offered a position or like working somewhere where they have imposter syndrome and they feel like they don't know what they're doing. And then they get offered a ridiculous amount of money. And then the gratification they get from that money kind of transforms them from the imposter syndrome into Dunning-Kruger thinking. And maybe someone who's worked their whole life to achieve the bullshit promises that capitalism gives us, and they are older and they're still making barely any money, could have much worse imposter syndrome if they're basing their value on their income.
Yeah, I think income is a big thing, like you say, especially in capitalist societies. And yeah, if you have a person who is feeling legitimate imposter syndrome, like they're competent and they're fine, but still learning or whatever, and then, as you say, actually do get lucky and get a position where they don't know what they're doing for real and just getting a shit ton of money for it, then that does give them this like false sense of competence, because they're like, well, look how much money I'm getting for this. I'm obviously amazing at this. And if you think of like social situations, if you go to like the majority of social gatherings and you're meeting people, the first thing they're going to ask you is, what do you do? And they're not asking what makes you happy or what do you care about. They're like, what salary do you earn?
Yeah, they're asking, like, how do you make money?
What is your social standing in terms of money and capitalism? That is all they care about.
When you could answer something like, oh, I'm a doodler.
Yeah.
I like to doodle.
And they'll be like, that's what? Like, but what? How do you make money?
I often thought that could be interesting, that if you went to social gatherings and someone asked you, just answer what you want.
Yeah.
I'm an adventurer.
Yeah.
And then they would have to be like, oh, it's not really what I meant.
Yeah. Or
how do you earn money?
Oh, that's nice. Hey, Frank, what's up? Yeah, but then I think also, like you say, when you have someone who's working a so-called shitty job, I don't think they would necessarily feel imposter syndrome about their job then, because they haven't actually achieved success by societal standards. So it's not like they have this outward reinforcement that they're rad. Like everyone and everything around them is telling them they're not worth much. So that would obviously affect their self-esteem. But it will, I think, give them imposter syndrome in other areas of life, like relationships. So they think like, I have a shitty job, I'm at this social gathering where everyone's these like CEOs and top earner whatevers. Why would they want to be friends with me? And your capacity for friendship has nothing to do with your salary.
Yeah.
But we feel like, oh, I have this like low social standing because of my salary, so now I can't be friends with you.
Yeah. Your worth is determined by your productivity.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense at all.
Like that. So another random question that I thought of that I haven't really thought out is, do you think other species can experience imposter syndrome?
I don't know. I personally don't think so. But I think it's a good question.
I don't know if it's a good question. Imposter question.
I don't know. I think it's good to not assume that just because other species are different that they don't have the capacity. But I don't know what function it would serve. Like I think our societies and cultures and all of that are so socially based. Not that there aren't social hierarchies and stuff in other animals, but I don't necessarily think the majority of animals have the kind of higher cognitive capabilities to feel imposter syndrome. Like to be able to analyze situations in so many layers. Like, how do I feel in this position? How does the person opposite me interpret how I am in this position? And what does that reflect on me? And all these different kind of analyses, I guess.
So maybe other species wouldn't experience it because of the way that structures are set up, hierarchical structures, where I'm thinking about it in terms of, say you had like a pack of wild dogs.
Yeah.
What's a species with a lot of hierarchy? Like hyenas, I think, have a lot of hierarchy. And you'll have all of these different positions, but it's not based on something that you can like apply for. Like in our society, there's so many people and you can try and do whatever you want. And maybe you get lucky and into some spot.
Yeah, but sometimes they have to battle it out to be like head of the pack. Yeah, so maybe they'll be like, I just won that fight and I don't know how.
Okay, maybe, yeah.
But I don't think most animals have those kind of higher cognitive capabilities for that. Like higher order thinking. So animals like dolphins have self-awareness, for example, but I don't know if it's to the point where they not only have self-awareness, but they can engage in this like comparative introspection. Yeah. It's like, I feel this, but does this person feel this? Are they better than me? It's like, I think that's a pretty human, stupid way of thinking. Like animals are almost too smart to waste time on that crap. They're just like, okay, I'm here now, let's just live. Okay. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I guess we might not ever know.
We can't really.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like dogs get embarrassed.
Yeah.
So there are certain, I feel like dumb human characters that some animals feel.
Although even that is kind of an assumption leap, because you can, with a fair amount of certainty, identify certain emotions in animals like happiness or sadness or whatever, but it's always going to have some level of interpretation. Like you can't be sure 100% that dog feels happy or embarrassed.
And I guess it's you using your human cognitive function as the benchmark.
Yeah.
This is what I'm basing my understanding of them on.
Yeah, it's anthropomorphism essentially. Okay. Like you have to in some way filter it through your own experience. So I don't know if other non-human animals feel imposter syndrome, but I doubt it. I think it's also important in understanding imposter syndrome in a human context that there are different manifestations. So for some people, I think their response to feeling imposter syndrome is to kind of immerse themselves in the task that they feel incompetent in and become perfectionists in that field and just become like a workaholic, overachiever, must do everything amazingly. But there's also another manifestation which I think I relate to better, in that you can feel that if you have to put in any amount of effort at all, then you're an imposter. Like then you're bad at this thing. And I feel like that's applied to my life so often, like through school and everything. I felt like if I had to try hard at anything, then I was obviously bad at it, so I would just give up.
Yeah, and it probably, I can totally relate to that. And it sucks if someone else also tries that thing, if maybe it's for the first time and they do really well.
Yeah.
Like that totally makes your imposter syndrome even worse.
Yeah, then you're like, well, obviously this should be easy and it's not for me, so I should just give up on everything.
Yeah, which brings in the concept of talent, right? Of maybe some people are talented and some are not, but I don't know what you think about.
I don't know so much about that because I think there's a lot of nature and nurture at play that we overlook a lot of the time. Like it might be the first time that person is doing that thing, but they might have watched people doing it or have similar experiences that are kind of an analogy for learning. But I don't know, maybe there is some kind of inherent talent. But either way, a lot of people do suck at things when they start. But yet if you have imposter syndrome, if you suck when you start, you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to give up now because I'm bad at this. But you've got some really, really amazingly skilled people who were really bad when they started and they just persisted. So I wish I was more of a perfectionist like that and just pushed through and achieved things instead of just being lazy. So I think a last question that I have on this topic is, how do you know within yourself if you're experiencing imposter syndrome and are actually competent but just feel incompetent, or if you're really an imposter, and does it matter either way?
I'm trying to figure out exactly what you mean.
So say you feel like an imposter, right? Think about at work. You feel like you shouldn't be there. You feel like an imposter. Is there a way, do you think, to determine whether you are actually an imposter and shouldn't be there, or whether it is imposter syndrome and you're fine, you're competent? And does it matter either way? If you're essentially faking it and making it, does it matter if you're faking it or if you just feel like you're faking it? You're actually just fine and competent.
Yeah, I don't think there's an ethical issue. Just because the majority of people are experiencing it. We're all just faking it till we make it, and all just don't know what we're doing, and sometimes it just somehow works out.
But then how do we know if, say, we experience imposter syndrome and we think, oh, but you know what, this is imposter syndrome, I'm fine. Next thing you know, Dunning-Kruger.
Okay, in terms of Dunning-Kruger, I don't see a positive and ethical way that could be.
Because the nature of imposter syndrome and Dunning-Kruger is that it's faulty thinking and that you are not self-aware. Because in imposter syndrome, you think you're incompetent, but you are. In Dunning-Kruger, you think you're competent, but you're not. So how do you know if you're experiencing either of those? So if I feel like I'm doing a crappy job at something, how do I know if I should just give up or if I should push on and call it imposter syndrome? Because then if I am an imposter, then I'm pushing right into Dunning-Kruger.
So that's the thing, like John Cleese said, you need the skills to know that you are one of those things, to be one of those things. I don't know.
Yes, but if you're feeling imposter syndrome, then you feel like you don't have the skills.
Yeah, but so I think it's ethically okay if you are actively involved in that thing. Like Dunning-Kruger is like, you don't know anything about.
Yeah, but Trump is actively involved in being a president,
That's
even
true.
though he doesn't know what he's doing.
I was thinking more in terms of, say this was a topic that you wanted to learn about. There are 10 books available that exist on this topic, and you've read all 10, but you still feel like an imposter versus someone who hasn't read any of them.
But it is possible to read 10 books and still not understand if you just
That's true.
don't understand.
Taryn, that's a very difficult question, and I don't know.
It is. I suppose as long as you're still making it, as long as you're still getting things right. So say you've got a job and you still haven't been fired after 2 months of a 3-month contract, then you can probably safely assume that you have imposter syndrome. You're not an imposter. You should be there. You're still getting paid. Nobody has criticized your work. So I guess it's probably the main solution is to look for accurate sources of feedback and to try and believe them.
Yeah, external sources, yeah.
But then you have to be willing to have criticisms hurled at you, because if you do by chance have Dunning-Kruger, you need to be like, am I good at this? And you have to be willing for people to say, no, you're not, please do something else.
Yeah, but it gets extreme in cases like Trump, where you have this person who is ruling or influencing the opinions of a lot of people in the world, calling Mexicans rapists, getting bomb threats from North Korea, that I feel like, that's an ethical problem.
Totally. So I think as long as people aren't being harmed, and as long as you're still not messing up, then you should just feel that you're semi-competent at least.
I would say that is my ethical and unethical line, is what are people being harmed? And by people, I'm including animals.
Yeah.
Is anyone being harmed? And if not, I have no ethical issue with you being an imposter or Dunning-Kruger.
The problem with Dunning-Kruger, though, is that you won't know that. Like, I mean, someone like Trump has a whole lot of ultracrepidarians like saying, yes, high five, you're doing a great job.
Nice use of that word, Taryn.
I know, right? I'm learning things as we go. This is great. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just about being genuine and sincere and realizing that we all feel like shit sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And maybe in an appropriate time, you could mention to someone who you trust, I feel like an imposter.
Yeah.
And then you would get external feedback.
Yeah, and say, you know what, you're not really that good at that.
Yeah, you should stop trying to do this because you suck at it.
Pete, I promise you, as your friend, that if you're ever doing something that I can see you're very bad at, I will tell you.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Okay.
Thanks, Darren.
Please do the same for me.
Okay, so I think that we've spoken pretty extensively about imposter syndrome and these surrounding issues.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully not wasted too many people's time.
Probably, but it's only like 3 people, so it's okay. Yeah, I think we've exhausted our intellectual capacity for the subject.
Probably. Now you know what imposters we are.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening. If you managed to get this far in the episode, we'd love to hear what you think about this topic, what you think about us. Tell us your experiences with imposter syndrome, or even give us suggestions for future topics. We're open to pretty much anything. You can also send us hate mail, but as much as we care about what you think, we'd rather just you send us pictures of your dog.
Yeah, and at the very least, if you are sending us hate mail, just attach a photo of your dog as well, so that we can cry about the hate mail and then feel a bit better because we'll be looking at dog pictures.
Yeah, so you can email us at letsragetogetherpodcast@gmail.com. That's letsragetogetherpodcast@gmail.com. And we would also appreciate it if you could leave us a review and rating on iTunes or wherever else you listen to this, so that more people can hear it. Maybe you can share it around. You don't have to.
No, you do. Please do it. Be cool.
Please do it.
And listen to episode 2 because maybe it will be better.
You want it?